A quick new idea, daily, from the world's greatest TEDx talks. I'm your host, Atossa Leoni, and this is TEDx Shorts. Starting at an early age, girls are taught direct and indirect rules on how their behavior will affect boys. From limitations on assertiveness to acceptance of domestic responsibilities. But these rules don't just affect women, they affect everyone. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie wants to imagine a world where generations no longer feel the restrictions assigned to their gender. Chimamanda is a novelist and recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant who challenges everyone, especially men, to imagine and build this world with her.
So I would like to start by telling you about one of my greatest friends, Okoloma Madwewesi. Okoloma lived on my street and looked after me like a big brother. If I liked a boy, I would ask Okoloma's opinion. Okoloma was a person I could argue with, laugh with, and truly talk to. He was also the first person to call me a feminist. I was about 14. We were in his house, arguing, both of us bristling with half-baked knowledge from books that we had read. I don't remember what this particular argument was about. But I remember that as I argued and argued, Okoloma looked at me and said, "You know, you're a feminist." It was not a compliment. I could tell from his tone, the same tone that you would use to say something like, "You're a supporter of terrorism." I did not know exactly what this word feminist meant, and I did not want Okoloma to know that I did not know. So I brushed it aside and I continued to argue. And the first thing I planned to do when I got home was to look up the word feminist in the dictionary. Now, fast forward to some years later. I wrote a novel about a man who, among other things, beats his wife and whose story doesn't end very well. While I was promoting the novel in Nigeria, a journalist, a nice, well-meaning man, told me he wanted to advise me. He told me that people were saying that my novel was feminist, and his advice to me, and he was shaking his head sadly as he spoke, was that I should never call myself a feminist because feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands. So I decided to call myself a happy feminist. Then an academic, a Nigerian woman, told me that feminism was not our culture, that feminism was an African, and that I was calling myself a feminist because I had been corrupted by Western books. Which amused me because a lot of my early reading was decidedly unfeminist. I think I must have read every single Milton Boone romance published before I was 16. But anyway, since feminism was un-African, I decided I would now call myself a happy African feminist. At some point, I was a happy African feminist who does not hate men and who likes lip gloss and who wears high heels for herself but not for men. Of course, a lot of this was tongue-in-cheek, but that word feminist is so heavy with baggage, negative baggage. You hate men, you hate bras, you hate African culture, that sort of thing. Gender as it functions today is a grave injustice. We should all be angry. Anger has a long history of bringing about positive change. But in addition to being angry, I'm also hopeful. I would like today to ask that we begin to dream about and plan for a different world, a fairer world. A world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves. And this is how to start. We must raise our daughters differently. We must also raise our sons differently. We do a great disservice to boys in how we raise them. We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity becomes this hard, small cage, and we put boys inside the cage. We teach boys to be afraid of fear. We teach boys to be afraid of weakness, of vulnerability. We teach them to mask their true self. What if both boys and girls were raised not to link masculinity with money? What if the attitude was not, the boy has to pay, but rather, whoever has more should pay? Now, of course, because of the historical advantage, it is mostly men who will have more today. But if we start raising children differently, then in 50 years, in 100 years, boys will no longer have the pressure of having to prove this masculinity. But by far the worst thing we do to males by making them feel that they have to be hard is that we leave them with very fragile egos. And then we do a much greater disservice to girls because we raise them to cater to the fragile egos of men. We teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. We say to girls, you can have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be successful, but not too successful. Otherwise, you will threaten the man. Because I am female, I'm expected to aspire to marriage. I'm expected to make my life choices, always keeping in mind that marriage is the most important. Now, marriage can be a good thing. It can be a source of joy and love and mutual support. But why do we teach girls to aspire to marriage and we don't teach boys the same? A woman at a certain age who is unmarried, our society teaches her to see it as a deep personal failure. And a man at a certain age who is unmarried, we just think he hasn't come around to making his pick. We teach females that in relationships, compromise is what women do. We raise girls to see each other as competitors, not for jobs or for accomplishments, which I think can be a good thing, but for the attention of men. We teach girls that they cannot be sexual beings in the way that boys are. We praise girls for virginity, but we don't praise boys for virginity. And it's always made me wonder how exactly this is supposed to work out, because we teach girls shame. Close your legs, cover yourself. We make them feel as though by being born female, they're already guilty of something. And so girls grow up to be women who cannot say they have desire. They grow up to be women who silence themselves. They grow up to be women who cannot say what they truly think. And they grow up, and this is the worst thing we do to girls, they grow up to be women who have turned pretense into an art form. The problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be, rather than recognizing how we are. Now imagine how much happier we would be, how much freer to be our true individual selves if we didn't have the weight of gender expectations. What if, in raising children, we focus on ability instead of gender? What if in raising children, we focus on interest instead of gender? Some of the men here might be thinking, okay, all of this is interesting, but I don't think like that. And that is part of the problem, that many men do not actively think about gender or notice gender. It's part of the problem of gender. Because gender can be a very uncomfortable conversation to have, there are very easy ways to close it, to close the conversation. So some people will bring up evolutionary biology and apes. But the point is, we're not apes. Apes also live on trees and have earthworms for breakfast, and we don't. Some people will say, well, poor men also have a hard time. And this is true. But that is not what this But this is not what this conversation is about. Gender and class are different forms of oppression. Some people will say that a woman being subordinate to a man is our culture. But culture is constantly changing. What is the point of culture? I mean, there's the decorative, the dancing, but also culture really is about preservation and continuity of a people. So if it is in fact true that the full humanity of women is not our culture, then we must make it our culture. I think very often of my dear friend, Ukoloma Madoewesi. He will always be remembered by those of us who loved him. And he was right that day many years ago when he called me a feminist. I am a feminist. And when I looked up the word in the dictionary that day, this is what it said. Feminist, a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. My great-grandmother, from the stories I've heard, was a feminist. She ran away from the house of the man she did not want to marry and ended up marrying the man of her choice. She refused, she protested, she spoke up whenever she felt she was being deprived of access, of land, that sort of thing. My great-grandmother did not know that word feminist, but it doesn't mean that she wasn't one. More of us should reclaim that word.
The TEDx talk you just listened to was recorded at a TEDx event in London, England. All TEDx events are independently organized by volunteers who believe in TED's mission of ideas worth spreading. Special thanks to the organizing team at TEDxEuston. Visit TED.com/TEDxShorts to listen to the full talk and learn more about TEDx Shorts. I'm Atossa Leoni. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.